Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Screenstars. I'm here today to bring you my review for the 1994 classic Frankenstein film, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The film is directed by Kenneth Branagh, and it stars Robert De Niro as the creature, Kenneth Branagh as Victor Frankenstein. We have Tom Holtz, Helena Bonham Carter, Aidan Quinn, Ian Holm, Richard Briers, John Cleese, Robert Hardy, and Sherry Lunge. A very impressive cast, I'm sure you'll agree. Now, this is the big screen adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. There was a big hoo-ha about this when it first came out, I remember, because it was Francis Ford Coppola that was originally going to direct this, because he'd just done Dracula the 2 years before. But he stepped aside and let Kenneth Branagh direct this, who was at the time a young up-and-coming filmmaker and actor. And I went to the cinema to see this when it came out, and you know the story of Frankenstein. We have Victor Frankenstein, played by Kenneth Branagh, who vows to find the secret of eternal life so that no one need never die once again after his mother dies in childbirth. He essentially goes to London to be, a well-respected doctor, but he experiments with unmentionable experiments. He teams up with John Cleese, who is very much like him, or he was, in the sense of he wanted to explore other avenues. And he does. He discovers, with the help of John Cleese's work, the secret to bringing corpses back to life. And he does just that, and he's absolutely appalled by what he's done. He then abandons the creature, declares his love for Helena Bonham Carter's character. They choose to get married, but the creature he left behind is not best pleased, and he seeks out his father in order to give him a terrible ultimatum. Right. What are my thoughts on this film? Well, as I said last week, when I reviewed Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, the new Netflix film, that everybody is raving about, and rightly so. It's a very, very good film. I very much enjoyed it. But I said in that review that I've always been quite a fan of this as well. I've always had a soft spot for this. I've always thought this was a good adaptation. And I was quite surprised at the time when this was kind of, I don't know if ridiculed is the right word, but it certainly didn't get good reviews from critics, and it didn't do particularly well at the box office. And that always surprised me. And I think maybe part of that is because it maybe wasn't of its time. Maybe it was too ambitious for its time. People weren't ready for this version of Frankenstein, if you like, because they'd been brought up on the classic versions of Frankenstein with the bolts in the neck type thing. And many of the things this film, Frankenstein, was ridiculed about at the time, the exaggerated acting at times, the almost Shakespearean approach to telling the story, the melodramatic speeches and all this kind of stuff, is part of the reason that Guillermo del Toro's has been praised so much, because of that kind of approach to telling the story. If you actually watch these two as companion pieces, this version and Guillermo del Toro's version, they are different sides of the same coin, in my opinion, my humble opinion. They're littered with very, very good performances, slightly different versions. Robert De Niro's creature, and Jacob Elordi's creature, they are the same, but at the same time very, very different. I do think the casting of the creature is better in Guillermo del Toro's, and that's not to say that Robert De Niro's performance is bad. It isn't. It's Robert De Niro. Of course it's not bad. But it was almost like I still remember at the time, Robert De Niro's Frankenstein's monster. That it just didn't seem to fit right to me. I mean, it does work quite well in the film, and he is quite savage and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, I think the casting could have been better. Kenneth Branagh gives, I think, a very, very good performance, a much more human performance, maybe, than that we get in Guillermo del Toro's version. But he's he's very flighty, and he's very much in love with Helena Bonham Carter in this, and he's very dramatic and all this kind of stuff. And I think Kenneth Branagh does absolutely fine in the role. And it's littered with incredible actors, Ian Holm and John Cleese and Tom Hulce and Helena Bonham Carter, and I mean, it just goes on and on and on. It's got an incredible supportive cast that really does enrich this film and make it, in my opinion anyway, a very enjoyable watch. I think for those of you who are watching or have watched the newest version, the Netflix version, Guillermo del Toro's version, and you've never seen this, give it a watch, and you'll probably be a bit surprised as to how similar they both are. I was watching someone's review of it, and I can't remember who now. And I mean, I don't necessarily agree with this, but they kind of said that they felt it was almost like a beat-for-beat remake of this film. I don't agree with that. There are quite a lot of differences when you can actually compare the two, but they certainly follow the same blueprint. Well, of course they do. They follow the novel, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. But at the time, I mean, Frank Darabont wrote this, and he was not impressed. He said he thought he'd wrote a brilliant script, but for a terrible film. Francis Ford Coppola and Kenneth Branagh clashed an awful lot when they were making it, apparently. Francis Ford Coppola, when he first saw the first cut of the film, he insisted on editing it, but Kenneth Branagh refused. He wouldn't let him. It sounded a little bit like Kenneth Branagh's ego probably got the better of him a little bit on set here. But it's one of those films that kind of probably had a little bit of a difficult production. But I think the end result here is a very, very watchable, good adaptation of a classic novel. Though apparently as well, Tim Burton was lined up to direct this at one point, and I can't bear to imagine this, but with Arnold Schwarzenegger playing the creature, that would have been fascinating to see the big man Arnie playing the creature. It probably would have been a disaster, I suspect. So, I mean, I do think it's a little bit unfair to judge this film on the reviews that it got at the time. I think this film has aged very well. I think it works very well as a film. I think it's effective. It's got good performances. The effects are all good. I mean, it gets a little bit, like I say, melodramatic. Of course it does. Over the top with the exaggerated dancing and acting, and all this flowy dresses and gowns everywhere. They really are going for an effective kind of performance to kind of, it's like a feast for your eyes a little bit at time. There's like gothic approach to telling the story too at times. But I think this is a solid adaptation. I'll stand by that. I think this film does deserve a second chance by most people, and I strongly suggest, if you haven't seen this version and you enjoyed the newest version, the Guillermo del Toro's version, you must give this one a go. I'll be fascinated to know what your thoughts are of this film in the comments, and I will see you back on the channel for another review very, very soon.